Aloha, mai kako. My name is Doug Harper. I am the Executive Director for Mālama Maunalua, and this is the final presentations for the 2022 Summer Internship Program. For those of you who have never attended before, what you are about to hear is each of our 5 interns from the summer cohort talking about the project that they undertook over the past 10 weeks. So the way we do this is each of the interns are given a project that fits with what Mālama Maunalua is looking for and what fits with their skills. And then they take the lead on it. So they come up with the work plan, they come up with the strategy, and they basically work through how they would address this particular project under the mentorship of one of our Mālama Maunalua staff, either myself, Alex, Pam, or Laura. So through this, you're going to hear a little bit about each of the interns and what they did for the 10 weeks. But before we get there, I want to give a little bit of a background about Mālama Maunalua and then how the internship program fits into what we are doing. So for those of you who don't know, this is Maunalua Bay. It is one of the 5 or 6 largest bays in the state of Hawaii. For those of you who are very unfamiliar, this is on the island of Oahu, southeast Oahu. On the left there, you can see the start of Waikiki. Just to the right of that is Diamond Head, and on the far other side is Hanauma Bay. And one of the things that's important to take note of with this picture is you see all of that development throughout Maunalua Bay. So in certain parts of the area, you have over 90% impervious surface. So Sofia is going to talk about that a little bit later, but impervious surface is just area where water can't penetrate. So things like roofs and cars. And so in the 50s, 60s, or cars and roads. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you started to see more and more development taking place in the Maunalua Bay area. And so that brought with it 2 challenges for the marine environment. One, more people are now in the area snorkeling, fishing, diving, jet skiing, and that provided a lot of stress and degraded the environment a little bit. But then you had all of this land development take place, which brought with it, because of that impervious surface, a lot of pollution from the land. And that 1-2 punch really saw a significant degradation of Maunalua Bay take place. And so in 2005, a hui of longtime residents noticed that the bay wasn't as healthy as they remembered when they were kids, and that there wasn't an organization focused on restoring it. And so they founded Mālama Maunalua with the intent that there would be one organization working to try and protect and restore the health of Maunalua Bay. And so our area is that entire area from basically Diamond Head on the left to Portlock on the right. And then because of what I talked about, the impact of land on the marine environment, it encompasses all of the terrestrial areas as well. So how the internship program fits within what we do. Shortly after the organization was founded, we created a conservation action plan. And what this is it took some of the longtime residents, some of the cultural practitioners, scientists, and basically started to break down what were we seeing as some of the issues with the bay and what were the biggest reasons for that degradation and how we could address it. And so the 3 that were identified were overutilization of the resource, invasive alien algae, and stormwater runoff. And so utilizing that conservation action plan, every year, Mālama Maunalua's staff sits down and identifies and prioritizes the key projects that we need to undertake to be able to address some of those issues identified in the CAP, the Conservation Action Plan. And so hypothetically, what we might do is we'll look at it and we'll say, well, we actually look at it and say, where do we have momentum? Where are there opportunities? And what are the biggest bangs for the buck? And hypothetically, let's say that comes out to 10 projects that we see as the highest priority projects for the coming year. The Mālama Maunalua staff, Laura, Pam, Alex, and myself, then look at what our work plan is looking like and what we can do to address each of those 10 projects. Well, with the staff so small, we're only able to take on, say, 5 or 6 of those projects, which means that of the 10 we think are ripe for being addressed, 4 or 5 of them are not going to be touched. And those 4 or 5 become the intern projects. And what I think makes that unique and what makes our internship program unique is that the interns don't come in and just kind of do similar things that everyone else has done as interns in this program, is they're either taking a project that had previously been done and expanding it, or they are undertaking a brand new project that is going to have real world application, and they're fostering it through to either completion or to be able to hand off to the next group to try and build upon. So each of the interns are not only understanding and learning how to address some of these issues on their own, but they're helping us as a benefit address some of the issues that we as a staff weren't able to take on. And they're learning it through a mentorship and guided area so that they can make they can get some of the lessons learned and experience under a little bit more of a friendly environment than maybe their first position out of school. What you're going to hear is there are a number of projects. So each of the interns is going to talk about each of the projects that they worked on, which is their primary project throughout the course of the 10 weeks. But it is nowhere close to the full encompassing of what they did while they were with us. And so you're going to see, or what you don't see, are any number of projects that they helped with. And they helped other organizations with some of their restoration work. They did things with cultural groups. They did terrestrial restoration. They did work around the island of Oahu. So what you're seeing really is, kind of a dip of the toe in the pool of the work that they did. And so I want to show a short video, a reel. So Sydney, who you'll hear about later, actually produced this for our Instagram account, social media. I liked it so much from her presentation. I stole it, put it in mine. You'll hear a little bit more about reels and the importance of outreach for the organization. But before then, I wanted to show this because I thought it did a really good job of showing the various things that the interns did.
God, I like you, I do. I wanna be a fan, I'm shopping in the Benz, I like you, I do. I hit you in the leg when you fit me in your pants, I like you. I got plex in the mail case season. Shout out to my UPS workers, making sure I receive it. You can do it too, believe it. I've been a talk to her.
So that short video, I thought, did a good job of hitting a lot of the different things that you saw in there. So for instance, you're not going to see any of the interns, I don't believe, talk a lot about the low-E work they did, other than maybe a couple of them mentioned they enjoyed doing it. But that was a project that they were able to undertake while they were with Mālama Maunalua. So know that the incredible work and the awe-inspiring tasks that they undertook, both as professionals and interns, is just a small slice of what they worked on. And so we could watch it twice, but we will move on to a big mahalo to the whole group of folks and organizations that have helped us make this possible. Mālama Maunalua has 3 internship programs. We have a spring, summer, and fall, and that is made possible by groups like the Omidyar Group, the Atherton Family Foundation, the Cook Foundation, the Marisla Foundation, the Joseph and Vera Long Foundation. Each of these have provided us the ability to be able to have these interns have the tools necessary to implement their projects and to provide us with the ability to provide the mentorship to them. But bigger than that as well, or bigger than just these groups, are the many volunteers that have helped with us, the partner organizations, the big support from the community that has made this possible. And so a big mahalo to not just these funders, but everyone who has supported and taken part in the internship program and helping Mālama Maunalua. If you're interested in providing support, you can go to the Mālama Maunalua website, and it'll tell you a little bit about our next cohort or our next applications for the next internship program, as well as ways that you can support the effort. And so before I hand off to Bree, we have just a couple protocols for the meeting. Everyone's microphones will be muted. Your screens will be blacked out. That's just to prevent some of the distraction from taking place. Interns are going to speak for about 6 to 7 minutes, leaving 1 to 2 minutes for questions. As you have a question, you don't need to wait for the end of their talk. Type it straight into the chat, and then when they finish their talk, they'll answer that. Also know that the interns are scheduled for about 7 to 9 minutes, and each of the interns has a set time to speak, and so to start. And so some people might be calling in to hear a specific intern, and so there's going to be a little bit of a delay if an intern finishes early. but minimize your screen if you don't see the speaker. Sometimes people can't with Zoom, but most of all, enjoy this. It's been a very, very good cohort. The work they've done has been incredible, and I know that it's going to come across when they give their presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bree.
Aloha, my name is Brianne or Bree Fong, and this summer I did the Native Collector Urchin Project, Phase 3, Trypnostes gratilla as a biocontrol agent for removing invasive alien algae in Maunalua Bay. So a little bit about myself, I grew up in New Valley and Kaimuki, and last year I graduated from the University of Rochester with a BA in Environmental Studies and in Psychology, and with a minor in Environmental Humanities. And this fall, I'm excited to attend the University of Hawaii at Manoa to pursue a Master's of Environmental Management. This summer, I wanted to intern with Mālama Maunalua because, as I said before, I grew up in New Valley, and that was with my popo, who still lives there now. And I just wanted to give back to a place I have a personal connection to. And I also wanted to learn more about how science, education, and community-based conservation intersect to create a positive impact on our environment. So for my project, some backgrounds. One of the main problems in Maunalua Bay has been the coverage of invasive alien algae, or IAA, and that's comprised of these 3 species, gorilla ogo, prickly seaweed, and leather mudweed. And one of the ways to address this problem has been to work with the Division of Aquatic Resources, or DAR, to implement native collector urchins, Trypnostes gratilla, or Hawaii maoli, as biocontrol agents to remove the IAA. Previous work done in this project, Phase 1 looked at adult urchin survivorship, Phase 2 looked at juvenile urchin survivorship, and my project, which is Phase 3, aims to build upon these previous phases and test a new cage design in order for us to better study urchin survivorship as well as monitor IAA in the bay. So first, we surveyed sites to outplant the urchins and chose these plots in the Paiko restoration area off of New Peninsula. And we chose these plots because they're not potential huki plots, as it is not easily accessible for the community. And also factors such as water depth were important to consider, as we wanted to make sure the sites were underwater at low tide so the urchins can survive. So for the cages, we built upon the design of the cages used in Phase 2, and those were 1 meter by 1 meter by 6 inches, but we built ours smaller to be 18 by 18 by 6 inches using plastic fencing, which is outlined here in black in the diagram. And we decided to keep the mesh skirt, which is outlined here in blue. We also consulted Kate Gonzalez from DAR and implemented her use of a PVC pipe frame, which is outlined here in orange. And this was to help make the cages more durable. Another addition we made were the PVC pipe clips, which are outlined here in green. And these were implemented to help us easily open and close the cage so that we didn't have to cut zip ties and then reattach new ones each time we closed it. We also built a quadrat at the top of the cage, which is outlined here in pink, and this was to help us easily survey the benthic. Another cool addition we made to the cages were these kilocams, and they were programmed and installed by a former intern, Mia Wheeler, and this was to help us better observe urchin behavior and movement in the cages, and she programmed them so that they would take 1 photo per hour from dawn until dusk. So for cage deployment, we deployed 3 cages off of that site in Paiko and used sandbags and cinder blocks to weigh down and secure the cage. And then we deployed 6 urchins per cage for a total of 18 urchins that were supplied by the DAR hatchery. For the variables we measured, we looked at the algae, and we took an initial assessment at the beginning, and we'll be taking one at the end. So the blue part in these pie charts represents the prickly seaweed, the red part represents the gorilla ogo, and we weren't able to find any leather mudweed, but cage 1 had a total IAA coverage percentage of 58.2, cage 2 had 57.5, and cage 3 had an 80% IA coverage. Other algae species we found were Halimeda, Spiridia, and Padina. Another variable we measured was urchin size. So initial measurements showed that the total average diameter of the urchins was 16 millimeters, which is less than the size of a quarter, as you can see in this photo for reference. And we'll also be taking their size measurements at the end of the study too. As for urchin count, we only have relative data because we deployed the urchins a little late due to constraints like weather. But after 1 week, we found a total of 7 urchins. And even though we weren't able to find all of the urchins, it was a good sign that we didn't find any urchin shells. So there have been no fatalities. And we also made sure that the cages have been secure and that there are no gaps for the urchin to escape. So they're most likely hiding, which is an observation consistent with previous urchin studies. So in addition to the study for my project, I also made this infographic to be used at education and outreach events, as well as on social media. And this is to help people better understand why native collector urchins are important in Maunalua Bay. So this first frame shows how IAA is the main problem that has been spreading across the bay. The second frame explains how native collector urchins are used as biocontrol. And this third frame shows how the presence of these urchins can help restore marine ecosystems. So for next steps, we want to continue to monitor the urchins and count them each week. And we'll also be maintaining the cages and scrubbing down any algae covering them and making sure that they're all secure and intact. And then at the end of the study, we'll be measuring the urchin size and surveying the benthic again. And these new cages can also be used in future research projects. As for personal outcomes, I learned a lot more about where I grew up, and I now have a stronger connection to this area. I'm also grateful to have had such a wide variety of experiences, from surveying algae and coral to education and outreach events. What I also love is that I got to engage with the community through hookies and work days with other organizations. I feel like I was able to learn so much about different types of conservation work. And I'm also happy that I was able to give back to the community and connect with the environment in so many different ways. So lastly, mahalo nui loa to everyone who helped with my project, especially the team at DAR, Mia Wheeler, my staff and mentors, my other fellow summer interns, the community, and all the partner organizations we worked with. And mahalo nui loa to everyone for listening. I will take questions at this time.
Okay, Bree, we do have a question in the private chat about if these urchins eat native algae as well.
Yes, they do, because they're native collectors.
Good job.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to Bree. Our next intern coming up is Jadyn. And just as a quick touch on what Bree just did as well, is the urchin project is one that's very important for us because it allows us, as she mentioned, to address areas that maybe the hookie can't, which is our manual removal of invasive algae. And as you heard, the Conservation Action Plan identified invasive alien algae as one of our biggest threats. So it was a really important project. And for the next one, here's Jadyn.
questions? What's the presentation? What time is it? Okay.
I think it's this one. Apologies, everyone. Our first technical difficulty of the night.
I clicked on the presentation. Just disappeared.
There.
There. All right. Sorry about that. All right. Aloha, my name is Jadyn Funkhouser, and my project is on the native seagrass bed restoration. A little bit about me is I'm originally from New Jersey, where I graduated from Raritan Valley Community College with an AS in environmental science. And then I currently attend Ohio Northern University, where I'm pursuing my BS in environmental and field biology with a minor in public health and honors concentration. The reason I wanted to intern with Mālama Maunalua this summer is because I pay close attention to environmental endeavors that are happening around the world. And Hawaii has a lot of initiatives that I notice especially. Mālama Maunalua has a lot of different ways they interact with the environment. I'm also thinking about going to graduate school in Hawaii. So I thought this would be a great way to get a jump start on my environmental career. The seagrass I worked with this summer was Halophilia hawaiiana. It is the only seagrass that is endemic to the Hawaiian Islands. It's endemic, meaning that it's only found here and not elsewhere globally. It has short blades that are about 2 centimeters in length, and then is connected by a series of rhizomes and roots that work to make the seagrass grow as a network and bed. It is an important habitat and food source for a variety of native organisms. However, it is currently being threatened by human activity. Human development can cause problems such as erosion, pollution, and the introduction of invasive alien algae. Invasive alien algae has pervaded into Maunalua Bay and then has outcompeted where we would naturally find native seagrass beds. So my project works to, once Mālama Maunalua has removed some of that algae from the region, to reintroduce the native seagrass that would be found here if not for human impact. How we were doing that is transplanting seagrass within the bay to new areas that is not found. Before we transplanted, though, we needed to identify a donor patch where we could take seagrass from the bay and not affect the health of that seagrass bed. And then once we identified our donor patch, we also identified a growth patch. What we were looking for there is a clear area where seagrass was not found yet. And we were looking for somewhere that was exposed to sunlight so the seagrass could get nutrients to grow, and an area that had a sediment depth of about 10 centimeters for the roots to grow, and then also a low presence of the invasive alien algae. In addition to identifying our sites, we made biodegradable mesh to place over the seagrass after it has been transplanted. We chose a biodegradable material so it would last long enough in the water for the seagrass to be able to take root, but also would not be harmful to leave in the ocean. So we made 3 mesh to go over our 1/4 meter by 1/4 meter plots within the growth site. Around this mesh, we wove in sticks on the outsides to give it some more structure, and then held it down using bricks and raffia, which is another biodegradable material. Then after that, we did the actual transplanting. So how we transplanted was the bin and shovel method. We shoveled up a healthy patch of seagrass, being careful to keep the sediment around the seagrass and to cause the least amount of destruction to the rhizomes and roots that we could. Then we placed these seagrass patches into a bin so we could transport them and keep them wet the whole time we were transporting them so they wouldn't dry out in the sun. Then once we got to our growth site, we put the seagrass back in the water and covered it with our mesh. Because the seagrass is so small, the mesh is really helping it to keep in place until it takes root.
Then after we transplanted, it was time to monitor our seagrass. So what I was looking for when I was monitoring was if it was exposed under the substrate, because sunlight is such an important growth factor for seagrass. I was also looking to see if the blades of the seagrass grew longer. And I was also looking at the blade color, because bright green blades are a good indicator of healthy seagrass, while clear colored blades could be an indicator that the seagrass is unhealthy. So these were the results we had. In our second plot, we did not see a lot of change throughout the experiment, but in both plots 1 and 2, we saw a lot of blade growth. It got to be a lot longer than it was when we initially transplanted the seagrass. However, those blades also turned clear in color. And we think this may be due to the seagrass putting too much energy into blade growth rather than root growth. Then around week 4, we noticed that there was only a small amount still present in each of the plots of the seagrass. This is kind of on average with other seagrass projects that have been done in the past and other types of research. Usually the seagrass after transplanting will only be viable for about 21 to 28 days. So this means that there is hope for the seagrass transplanting. We did see it survive as long as has been expected with other past projects. However, in the future, I would recommend moving larger sections of seagrass during the transplant. So if some of it does die off, it doesn't affect the whole patch, and there's more of a chance for it to start making a network and making that bed. I would also recommend the continuous use of the biodegradable mesh, because that did work to hold the seagrass in place and not let it flow off into the ocean after transplanting. The bin and shovel method was a very good way to practically move the seagrass across the bay. And then another recommendation I would make if this project were to happen again, or a similar type of research, is the removal of the blades from the seagrass after transplanting. Because plots 1 and 3 put so much energy into growing their blades, it seems as though the rhizomes and roots were neglected and started to die off. If we remove the blades, it will force the plant to put more energy into creating that root and rhizome system. And then personal highlights for me during this internship was I got to learn about new environments, both environmentally and culturally. I really got to experience what Hawaii has to offer. I got additional experience in leading a research-based project through my seagrass project. I also did get that perspective on what I want to do in graduate school programs and my career moving forward as an environmentalist. We had plenty of opportunities for community engagement and public outreach, and I got to work on skills like public speaking. And one of my favorite things was just all the involvement we had with different nonprofit organizations. And then I want to say thank you to everyone for listening. A special thanks to Alex and Pam for being my mentors on this project, and to Bree, Sarah, Sydney, and Sophia for being my fellow interns this summer. And with that, I will take any questions that you have. All right, we have a question that says, what was the most difficult aspect of planting the seagrass? Definitely just weather conditions is always hard when you're working in the field. That day it was raining and kind of a rough start to the morning, but we were successful in actually moving the seagrass. But yeah, working in the ocean can be kind of unpredictable too.
Thank you. Thank you, Jadyn. And our next presenter is Sydney, who you got a little bit of a teaser about earlier from the video you saw with my presentation. So with that, I will hand it over to Sydney.
Okay, aloha everyone. I'm Sydney Millard, and this summer I served as MM's Outreach and Education intern. So during this presentation, I'll tell you about what I did this summer. So firstly, a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Waipahu, more specifically in the Ahupua'a of Waikele, in the Moku of Ewa. And last school year, I graduated from West Oahu with a BAS in Sustainable Community Food Systems and a BA in Political Science. And I wanted to intern with this summer because after graduating from college, I was away for some time, and coming back home, I felt the need to connect back to Aina and just being home. And at the same time, now that I've graduated, I thought that this would be a great way to help me figure out what's next. So firstly, some importance of ONE, Outreach and Education. So Mālama Maunalua is committed to restoring the health of Mauna Loa Bay through habitat restoration, science and planning, and education and outreach. So right there, education and outreach is in that commitment because education and outreach brings awareness to the community about what we're doing as an organization. And we go into classrooms and talk to keiki because we're trying to inspire the next generation to get involved. And of course, all of this is done to increase involvement and hopefully get them involved in what we're doing and create change. So the tasks that I took on this summer was participating in outreach and education events, creating flyers when needed, and taking on social media. So outreach and education events included tabling and education lessons. So right here was us at Kahala Mall tabling on World's Ocean Day, sharing with the public what we do as as an organization and trying to get people to get involved. And here's us earlier this summer at the YMCA where we taught some outreach lessons. And here's me leading keiki on limu weaving, which we then transplanted into the bay. So here are some of the flyers that I created over this summer. I created them through the website Canva. So you probably saw this flyer that went out in the emails inviting you to this presentation. And then here is a revamped internship recruitment flyer that I made as well. So on to social media. Social media is my particular favorite of this internship. And the basic procedures that I went through to post to social media was I was given a task. And from there, I either created the post on Canva or searched through photos to find ones that fit properly for the task. And then I composed the caption. And from there, I sent it to my mentor, Laura, who then gave it approval for it to be posted onto our social media channels. So firstly, we have the Cherish, Protect, and Restore post, which is a campaign that is doing to try to address stormwater runoff in the region. So you can follow that account at CPR Maunalua. And here's the July post that I created. And our goal was to pretty much create one post per month. So this was my July post that focused on how you could create a rain garden in your own home. And then I made posts as well for our account, which you can follow on Instagram at Mālama Maunalua. And for these, they were meant for education, updates, and just to inform the public about different things. So I made these as well on Canva. So this one right here was a brown water advisory when we were having a lot of rain. Here, this one was for Clean Beaches Week. This one here was for the 4th of July weekend and how people can be more sustainable over that weekend. And this one was about our Win the Rain Barrel initiative that was part of signing up for rainwater assessment on your own property. So right here is an example of how it kind of looks on Instagram. This was a halfway internship update. So halfway through our internship, we updated our followers about kind of what we were doing with photos to let them know all the adventures that we've been having. And now onto social media reels. For me, social media reels are my favorite part of social media. If you're not familiar with them, they're basically short videos on Instagram, up to 90 seconds long, that are kind of just a fun, trendy way of showing off what you're doing. And although they're a lot of fun to make, they are the most challenging and time-consuming of my tasks. They're the most challenging, essentially because you have to sort through all the footage and kind of come up with a creative way to display it in the video. And at the same time, because it is a business account, there is limited audio. So I kind of had to be creative in choosing that audio. So you did see that first reel that Doug showed at the beginning of our summer internship highlights. And so that was one, but you can visit our Instagram page to see more, but I'll kind of show you another one that I made at the beginning of this summer that showed off our engagement with the Cocoa Heads Summer Fun program to revamp their rain garden in their park.
Come on, Harry, we want to say goodnight to you. So when you go to town, the way did that too. She thinks it's special, but it's so real. That was our place. Easier said than done. I thought you were the one listening to my heart instead of my head. You found another one, but I am the better one. I won't let you forget me.
So there should be 2 more Instagram reels that will be dropping this week. So look out for that on our Instagram page. But again, they're just a fun way of showing off what you're doing on social media these days. Now, moving forward, of course, continuing outreach and education is crucial for Mālama Maunalua to educate the public about what we're doing and to, of course, increase involvement, gain more volunteers. Social media, I would say, is a very powerful tool these days to reach a wide range of people who may not necessarily live in the region, but they may also want to get involved. So we can reach a vast number of people through social media, such as Instagram, like we're doing. And specifically for social media, I would recommend that Reels are kind of the way to go these days. They're just kind of trending. They're a fun way to get people engaging with the social media posts. So yeah, Reels are kind of my suggestion for social media. And as for personal outcomes, in the beginning, I mentioned that I was away from Hawaii for some time after graduating from college last year. So this program definitely did make me feel reconnected and grounded being here at home again. I loved getting involved and giving back to the community with our various projects. And all of the activities that we did, from the snorkeling, hiking, working in the lo'i, were just super fun summer activities that I would want to do during the summer anyway. So it was great that I got the chance to do it through this program. And as for skills and knowledge, kind of more of these technical things that I obtained from participating in this internship were like limu and coral surveying, urchin cage building, getting to know more species, the mo'olelo of the area. And these are great takeaways, I think, being an intern for an MM. And then finally, specifically for my internship position, I got the chance to practice my outreach and education skills that I will definitely be using in my next internship with Sustainable Coastlines. We'll be doing education and outreach for them as well. And with that, I'd just like to say mahalo to you all for listening and watching my presentation. Mahalo to my fellow interns for being with me this summer, my mentor, Laura, and the rest of the MM staff for everything this summer. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have. Okay.
All right, Sydney, we do have a question in the chat. The question is, which schools did you teach for education and outreach, and what was the lesson plan?
So for education and outreach, we showed that picture earlier in the slides of the YMCA Summer Fun program that they were hosting. And because those were kind of younger kids, we played games with them about invasive and native species to get them to know about that, along with sharing a little bit of information about Mālama Maunalua as an organization, just to kind of get that into their brains as well. But the most fun part was doing like the limu weaving that I had mentioned with them, where we actually brought some native limu, and then helped the little kids weave it into those braids that we could then transplant into our bay. So that was the kind of lesson that we did. I wasn't able to participate in it because I was sick, but my fellow interns and advisor went to Iolani schools as well to do an outreach lesson with them. And we had also tabled at Roosevelt to share about our organization and conservation as a career.
Thank you. All right, thank you to Sydney for that. One of the big things with doing restoration, doing science, and certainly with incorporating the community, it is critical to have that ability to communicate the information to the public so that they can understand it and hopefully be motivated to take action. So the work that Sydney did this summer was incredibly important to us. And similarly, in somewhat of an outreach vein, but also with somewhat of a restoration component, is Sofia, who is our next presenter.
Hi, my name's Sofia, and this summer I worked on the Follow the Drop initiative. So a little bit about me is I'm from Kailua and I just graduated from Iolani, and next year I'll be attending Virginia Tech for their architecture program. And I was first introduced to Mālama Maunalua when I did a huki with my marine biology class, and there's a photo of me at my very first huki. And I just learned so much and I loved everything we did that day, so I decided I wanted to apply to their summer internship. I also have a passion for the environment, but I was uncertain about how that would fit into my future. So I was hoping that doing this internship would give me some clarity into the direction I would like to take. So Follow the Drop focuses on one main issue, which is runoff in Maunalua. So as Maunalua has become more developed, the amount of impervious surfaces, so surfaces that don't absorb water, this would be like roads, driveways, and roofs, has increased. So this map down here, the red shows the impervious surfaces in Maunalua. And as those surfaces have increased, the amount of runoff that is coming off of these areas has also increased. And this runoff contains pollutants like fertilizer, automobile fluids, and lots of sediment. And this is what creates that brown water warnings that we see on the news sometimes. So this runoff goes into the canals and into the bay with no filtration. So as you can imagine, this is extremely harmful to the ecosystems that exist out there. One thing it does is it smothers coral and sediment, which is this middle photo right here. And another thing it does is create the perfect environment for invasive algae to thrive. So that's where GSI, or Green Stormwater Infrastructure, comes in. So GSI is meant to mimic the natural rain cycle. So when rain comes down, instead of creating runoff, it helps that the water will be reabsorbed back into the ground. So an example of that here is the permeable pavement, which allows the water to penetrate the surface. So Follow the Drop is an application created by 3R Water that's in its piloting stage. And what it does is it hopes to mitigate stormwater runoff on private property by giving information to homeowners that will encourage them to implement these forms of green stormwater infrastructure on their properties. So it's able to calculate how much runoff is coming off a property, and then it will produce potential solutions like a rain barrel or a rain garden that will help catch that water that's coming off their properties. So coming into this internship, I had two main tasks. One of them was to spread the word about this Follow the Drop application. And the other one was to encourage people to sign up for our free rainwater assessment where we use that application. So this project is important to a few different groups of people. First up, property owners. It has both economic and social benefits. So by using Follow the Drop and implementing GSI, you can help reduce flooding and erosion on property, as well as conserve water, all which can save money. And it can also improve the quality of life, because by improving the conditions of the bay, people will begin to return to these areas with family, with friends, for those social gatherings. And then for Maunalua Bay as a whole, it'll help reduce the amount of pollution that is entering the water, which will also nurture the native ecosystems that we have out there. So hopefully we'll start to see native fish come back and corals will start to grow again. And then as well as island-wide, when rainfall comes down and it's reabsorbed back into the ground, it actually recharges our underground aquifers, which supply our entire island with its fresh water source. So that in itself is extremely important. So personally, what I did this internship to take action was I distributed 500 door hangers in the Maunalua area, so Niu Valley, Kuli'o, and Ainahaina. And these door hangers had information about our free rainwater assessment and what runoff is and why it's bad. And then I created and distributed 15 flyers to local stores in the area, which also advertised our free rainwater assessments. I did a few in-person events like hookie speeches and outreach tables, as well as created a social media post that advertised our incentive of a free rain barrel raffle, which was to encourage people to sign up for our assessments. And then the last thing I did was some outreach and education material. And so this outreach and education material was actually one of my favorite things that I worked on. So going to these rainwater assessments, I noticed that some of our participants had no idea what a rain barrel was or no idea what a rain garden was. So I created these infographics, keeping simplicity in mind, with some diagrams, short blurbs, and lots of pictures to help people conceptualize these GSI that we were talking about. So this is the rain barrel one, and then here's the rain garden example. And I think that creating these infographics really helped people to understand what we were talking about and give kind of a more palpable idea. And why I liked it so much is that I think I recognized there was a problem in what we were doing, and I was able to come up with something that could help solve it. So as for the results, since I've come on, signups for the rainwater assessments have increased by 5 times the original amount. So I think this just goes to show that the word is getting out there and this outreach is working. And it's a super good sign that people are understanding our initiative and are supportive of our cause. So in the future, for the next steps, continued outreach is a must. Adding blurbs in newsletters, putting up more flyers around the area, and just doing anything we can to get people's attention and reach as many people as possible would be great. We could also produce more door hangers. Although we did distribute 500, there were a lot of properties that we weren't able to reach. So I think adding that to the list as well can help spread that as far as we can. And as for personal growth, I think I gained so much from this intern experience. Coming in as a high school student, I think I lacked a bit of confidence in myself and my abilities, but being given this project and taking leadership and initiative and being proactive really helped me to explore that side and challenge myself. So I was really grateful for that. I also got to see what a career in conservation looked like, which is something I was super curious about when I came in. And the final thing that I was kind of surprised to learn about was the connection between community, culture, and environment. So in Hawaii, we have a super unique intersection between these 3 things. And I think I was super fortunate to be able to witness that in this internship. And finally, of course, I'd like to give a thank you to the Mālama Maunalua crew, my fellow interns, the 3R Water staff who helped me, and of course, all the people who allowed me to put up flyers in their store or do outreach at their malls. So thank you again. And if you guys have any questions you'd like to ask me, feel free to put them in the chat or turn on your mic.
All right, Sophia, we have one question in the chat. The question is, how much does a rain barrel typically cost?
So the costs vary as the rain barrels get bigger, but a 50-gallon one would be about between $100 and $150. Of course, that varies with the kind of decorative ones you get. But we have been giving out forms for $40, a rebate form from the Board of Water Supply. So it gives $40 off rain barrels, up to 5 different rain barrels. So we've been giving that to our participants in the signups.
Great job, Sophia. All right, thank you to Sophia. One of the things with the projects I mentioned, stormwater runoff, and as she mentioned, stormwater runoff and water quality are major issues for the Bay, and it's an extremely difficult challenge for us to address because the infrastructure is basically hardened. It's things like concrete and roads and homes. And so the only way we can really address it is through projects like what she undertook this summer. And so she did an incredible job, and I'm really happy with what she did because it's such an important job. And speaking of equally important jobs, we have Sara as our final intern, who's going to talk about some of the coral work that we're undertaking and some of the survey stuff. So with that, I will hand it off. Don't forget to move the camera.
Okay. Aloha everyone, my name is Sara and I'm going to be talking to you about my project monitoring and assessing the habitat of our coral reefs in Maunalua Bay. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Sonoma County, California. I got my degree in aquatic biology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I'm now pursuing my Master's of Science in Marine Science at HPU, Hawaii Pacific University, intending to graduate next spring. My background is in environmental education and marine fieldwork, including 5 years as a NOAA Corps officer, where I did shipboard research throughout the Atlantic and Caribbean Ocean, and was the marine operations coordinator for the Humpback Whale Sanctuary in Maui for 3 years. So the overall goal for this project, the big picture, is to restore healthy corals to Maunalua Bay. We care about corals because Hawaii reefs are valued at over $33 billion. They provide a wealth of ecosystem services, including habitat, so places for other organisms to live, things, substrate for them to grow on. They provide storm surge from protection from incoming swell and storms. They provide food not only for the other organisms within the reef habitat, but also sustenance for humans on land. They also boost our tourism economy and bring a lot of people into the state. So definitely important that we maintain these reefs. As you're probably familiar, there are a lot of threats facing coral reefs though. Pollution, runoff, pesticides, things like this are entering the water and damaging the reefs. Global warming is the main cause of coral bleaching and is killing a lot of coral reef around the world. Human infrastructure, including development and dredging, can be detrimental, as well as overfishing, removing those resources that feed into that ecosystem. So my goal for this project was to continue to strengthen our monitoring efforts. So this is a long-term project that Mālama Maunalua has been doing for several years to monitor the bay, to get an idea of what kind of corals are out there, what abundance, and as well as the fish and other wildlife that we see in the bay. So the main objectives were to survey to increase our data set. It's really important to have long-term trends that we can use to inform future decision-making. I also wanted to do a community training event. Because Mālama Maunalua is a small nonprofit, we want to engage our community members because they can also help us be stewards of the bay by doing transect surveys. So we did a community training in July where we brought on 7 new volunteers that can now grab their friend, train them, and go out into the bay and do these surveys. And I also created a standard operating procedure for our coral net, our benthic habitat assessment database that I'll talk a little bit more about. So our surveys took place throughout Maunalua Bay, and I want to go over what we did during our surveys. So there are 5-minute transects. You start at point A and you swim for 5 minutes to point B, taking GPS coordinates on either side. And we have groups of 5 people. So the first 2 people are our fish diversity and abundance surveyors. They use the fish transect survey on the left you see there, and we're essentially just tallying the fish we see. So different types of fish and groups and families, including invasive species and native species. The next group to go is the benthic or bottom cover photographer. So this person carries with them a GoPro and takes a photo of the benthic habitat or the bottom habitat about every 10 feet or every 2 or 3 fin kick cycles. So you can see on the bottom there some examples of the benthic habitat photos we got throughout the bay at the different sites. They do vary quite a bit, but this is a really good way of being able to assess the bottom habitat. Once we get back home to our computers, we can look at it. It's a lot easier than taking tally of what we see out in the water. And the last group to go is our COA card surveyors. They are using these COA cards developed by Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And what these do is help give us an assessment of the coral health. So these colors represent the different stages of bleaching or health of the coral. So the surveyor will hold the card up to the coral like you see in the photo and pick the color and the number that best represents the coral they're looking at and assign it also to one of those shapes you see there. And all of this is part of the greater HIMB database that they're using all over the state. So I mentioned our coral net. This is an online database that we're utilizing now. for classifying that benthic habitat. It's used all over the world. There's over 2,700 sources, Mālama Maunalua being one of those sources. There's also several other on Oahu and throughout Hawaii. There's over 2 million images in this database. So it's a really great way for us to connect and see what other sites are doing, what other sites look like. And what this system does is it generates 30 random points, and then you go through and you identify or annotate each one of those points. So one thing we had to do is create our label set. What do we want to call everything? So we have the different coral species, Montipora, Parietes, as well as what those species look like. Are they bleached? Is it dead coral? Are they overgrown with algae? Things like that. And we're also identifying the different algae species we see and the substrate type. So I developed the SOP for this and created the methods so that we can be consistent moving forward and also go back to the images we've received in prior years and reassess them with this new consistency. Our results, we were able to do transect surveys at 6 different locations throughout the summer, from as far west as Black Point and as far east as Portlock. So we did cover quite a bit of the bay. We did a total of 20 transects and were able to upload over 200 photos to that coral net system for analysis. The result of our fish diversity survey was that we see quite a few wrasses. They're definitely the majority out there. They are 54% of what we're seeing in the bay, followed by surgeonfish and tang, and then damselfish, pufferfish, and a few other species, of course, but those are the majorities we're seeing. A lot of the fish we see are also juveniles and babies, we like to mention, because we're serving inshore the reef break, which indicates that this is probably a lot of nursery habitat for these fish. Some of the challenges of my project, of course, are weather, as is any field science, field work. Surveying the South Shore during summer brings in a lot of swell. So that was definitely a challenge. We also really had to work through some issues with the labels that we created in CoralNet, because we had to make decisions like, what are we defining as coral rubble versus dead coral versus coral framework? So that was kind of a great discussion that we got going in order to consolidate to 50 labels. And then another challenge that will continue to be a work and effort is that community engagement. So like I said, we were able to bring on 7 new volunteers to help with these surveys. It's really critical that we continue to give them the resources they need to go out there, to have the opportunity to do these surveys with us and make sure we're maintaining those communications. Impacts of the project, long-term monitoring is always a really great, important thing in science. What I accomplished in 10 weeks tells us a little bit, but what this whole data set will mean over years means that we can inform decision-making. We can identify new sites for coral transplants, such as those fragments, those corals of opportunity you see in the above picture. We can bring those into sites that we've identified that might be good for transplanting, areas that have, already robust, healthy corals is where we're going to want to put those new corals of opportunity. We can also use this information from our fish surveys to inform fisheries management decisions, etc. Personal highlights for me, I really thoroughly enjoyed this internship and interacting with other conservation groups. We were able to do a lot of great work. For example, in the Lo'i, we worked with other organizations like Protect and Preserve Hawaii and 808 Cleanups. My knowledge of local flora and fauna increased exponentially. I got to see some really cool things like nudibranchs. Those sea slugs you see in the bottom right are some of my favorite animals. I learned all about limu. I really enjoyed experiencing the creating and managing a monitoring project, engaging those community members, and kind of seeing it come out in fruition. I also enjoyed that Mālama Maunalua is a pretty dog-friendly organization, and my puppy Pablo is a budding naturalist as well and got to join us on some of these projects. So thank you everyone, to my mentor Pam, to Alex for helping all of us interns with all of our projects, to all of our volunteers who came out and surveyed with us, huge mahalo to you, and to everyone who helped make this project a success. And I am open for questions.
All right, Sarah, we do have one question in the chat. The question is, did you see any differences in the species seen at each site? And if you did, what types of differences?
That's a great question. Yeah, there were definitely some differences. The site that I noticed the greatest coral abundance and fish abundance was at Black Point. I thought that was a really unique site. We also had really great visibility there. So some days we didn't have as great a visibility, but areas like Havakui have a lot more wave energy. And so we didn't see quite as robust corals there. So it definitely changes based on the wave energy, the swell, the weather that those areas are experiencing.
Awesome. Another question just popped into the chat. How did your work experience help with this internship program?
That's a great question. I will say flexibility, first of all. If you've worked in the field, you learn that flexibility is key because the weather does not always cooperate. But I think also just understanding how transects work, how to organize people and volunteers and delegate things was a really big help for getting these surveys going and informing people and, getting to interact with the public. I think that's something that, working in science for as long as I have has helped with. Thank you.
Great job. So thank you to Sarah for that presentation. Being able to understand what we currently have in the Bay is critical for being able to understand how all these other projects you've heard about tonight and that Mālama Maunalua is undertaking, how those are impacting the environment and what kind of changes are being witnessed. But thank you all for staying on and listening to the incredible work that these 5 women have done over the past 10 weeks. It's amazing what they were able to accomplish in such a short time, especially considering all the other stuff they're working on at the same time. So I want to thank all of you for staying on. Thank, of course, the interns for such incredible work. And if anyone wants to see more of this or see or be able to share what they did, you can go to Mālama Maunalua's website or to our social media, and we'll be eventually sharing the presentations there. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays, and we will hopefully see you soon.